Staying on the topic of ESG, we will now be moving into our first panel of the day, integrating ESG from seed to scale. Is it ever too early to integrate ESG? We would like to introduce our moderator, Katie Turner, who will then introduce our panelist. And Katie Turner is an independent consultant who has over 15 years of experience in gender lens investing, ecosystem development, gender smart technical assistant, blended finance, gender climate nexus, and program design and development.
Her work focuses on shifting financial systems to be more equitable in order to create positive and sustainable change. Katie's expertise builds on her deep experience across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, working with a range of ecosystem actors, including impact investors, accelerators, investment and business associations, think tanks, and economic development organizations, and collaborating with funders and ecosystem builders. Katie is an active member of the Canada Forum for Impact, Investment, and Development. Welcome, Katie.
Another round of applause for Katie, please.
Morning. You're supposed to say good morning. When I spent time in Latin America, everyone you get on a city bus and everyone says buenos dias. And I came back to Toronto and I tried that. It didn't go over as well. They're like, who is that crazy woman say good morning to us? I like the idea of just being friendly regardless. Okay, so are we ready to go? Okay. So good morning, everyone. So nice to be here. This is my first time at this conference, actually. And I had a fantastic time yesterday listening to all the speakers, and I really like the diversity of attendees from government to academia, students, private sector. And for me, that's really important because we're talking about these complex systemic challenges related to the Sustainable Development Goals, and massive collaboration is needed between these groups in order to come up with solutions. So I think that diversity is really critical. As I believe was mentioned in the introduction, I'm an independent consultant. I'm based in Waterloo. My focus is on gender lens investing, which is, in a nutshell, an area related to being more intentional about integrating women into investment, either investing in women entrepreneurs, investing in companies that have products and services for women, or high gender diversity in their staff. It's a niche area within impact investing, which is an area that I've been involved in for over 15 years. So I'm really excited about this panel discussion with our great panelists today. So this conversation is going to build on some of the things that were discussed yesterday. We heard perspectives that there's two kinds of companies, those that are already integrating impact and those that have not yet integrated impact but are well positioned to do so. We wondered about whether you can have your cake and eat it too. Can you create impact and also generate financial return? And we heard about shifts in mindset over the past few decades with respect to sustainable business. So one of the speakers mentioned whereas sustainable finance or sustainable business was once equated with recycling paper cups, there's now a very strong business case for the benefits of sustainable business in terms of increased revenue generation and attracting capital from investors. You've likely heard many different terms being used yesterday in terms of ESG investing, impact investing, sustainable finance, sustainable investing. We're not going to get too technical in terms of the differences of these terms, but we will spend a little bit of time talking about the differences between ESG and impact investing. But what I think is important is the bigger picture. So how can we use our capital as a tool for social change to address the sustainable development goals? How can we use capital as a tool for social change? I think that is really critical when we're talking about addressing inequalities, addressing climate change, trying to create decent jobs and economic growth. Specifically, is it ever too early or too late to integrate issues of environment and social into our business practices? So, the panelists with me here today have amazing experience in both Canada and emerging markets, and I know that they will have some very interesting perspectives on these questions. So let's get started. Tim Jackson, welcome. So nice to see you. Tim Jackson is a board member and chair of the investment community at the Waterloo Region Community Foundation. He is also the CEO of SHAD Canada that offers STEAM and entrepreneurship programs to kids in grade 10 and 11. Welcome.
Thank you.
Magali Lamyin is the managing partner at Deetken Impact, a Canadian impact asset manager that invests in high-impact businesses across Latin America and the Caribbean, and has a very strong gender focus. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie.
Samuel Akyianu is the managing director at the Mastercard Foundation Africa Growth Fund at MEDA, the Mennonite Economic Development Associates. He has extensive development finance experience in Africa and Asia, including managing the IFC's global portfolio of SME venture funds. Welcome, Samuel.
Thank you.
And Grayson Bass is the founding lab manager at Smart Waterloo Region Innovation Lab, an organization that aims to create the best community in Canada for children and youth. Welcome, Grayson.
Thank you.
So, let's get started. So just to start, could each of you briefly share a little bit about your respective organizations? And in more detail, can you share your views on some of the differences between ESG and impact investing, as well as how they intersect? So maybe Tim, we'll start with you.
Sure. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm here in my role as chair of the investment committee of the Waterloo Community Foundation, and some of my colleagues who work at the foundation I see are here today. We have been on a 2-year journey to move 100% of our assets to mission-aligned investing. And so we've been spending a lot of time with firms and advisors asking this question about impact investing. And often the answer we got back was, oh, you mean ESG. And so I'm far from an expert, but my observation is that what people meant by that was when they said ESG, they meant to us, oh, you want us to assess the things you're investing in. And we kept saying, no, we want to measure impact. And so it seemed that many of the advisors and firms were simply saying, we'll check a box. Do they have good governance? Are they doing different things? Versus the deliberate approach. And I was fortunate to spend a lot of time with Katie, to some extent, in the impact investing space. And I think that was one of the key things for us, is that the deliberate, not the residual effects of perhaps some of the taking an ESG approach may have some impact, but we were actually looking at it from the standpoint of being deliberate. Are the investments we're making with our portfolio, if it's about $120 million, are they having meaningful impact? So at a very simplistic level, that's how I sort of think about it, is one is just sort of checking off some boxes or assessing versus saying, what is the deliberate impact you're trying to have?
Thanks, Tim. And that's often a word that you often hear in terms of impact investing, the intentionality of it, right? The intentionality of measuring the impact. Exactly. Thanks, Tim.
Excellent.
Magali.
Yeah, so again, thank you for inviting me, ESG Tree, SDSN. I'm really happy to be here. It's been a fantastic conference so far and having really interesting conversations. So, Deetken Impact, as Katie said, we're an impact asset manager, so we invest with the intention of generating positive impacts, social and environmental, with our investments, while also balancing risk-adjusted financial returns. We invest in Latin America. We've made around 60 investments in total through 5 impact funds, all in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean, in sectors such as renewable energy, financial inclusion, affordable housing, education, healthcare. The way we see impact is that it typically has to be embedded in the business model. It has to be embedded so that as the business grows, the impact grows with it. I'll give you an example. A company we invested in Mexico, they do cataract surgery and other eye surgeries for low-income populations. So that the more surgeries they make, the more they're impacting people, right? And with really life-changing results. So you see how the incentives are aligned in that way with the impact. ESG, for us, it's always been a risk mitigation tool, right? We talked yesterday about check the box, right? It's there. It allows you to see the potential risks, but I think it's changing. It is changing when you include that intentionality. It's changing when you think about how you can positively affect the stakeholders in your business, your employees with more gender-responsive and inclusive policies in the workplace, your clients with more intentional ways of reducing your environmental footprint, the communities where you are located with intentional initiatives that promote economic growth within those communities, and other ways such as product circularity as well. So it is the intentionality that allows you to being able to measure the impact that you're having with your initiatives and your policies and practices.
Thanks, Magali. So we're hearing intentionality, additionality, measuring with respect to impact investing, and then ESG is more sort of risk mitigation and screening out.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Over to you, Grayson.
Well, I don't know how much I have to add to both of those really well-formed answers. And I'm really interested to hear what Samuel has to say. I would just say that here in the region, my lab, as Katie mentioned, is focused on making this the best community for children and youth. So a lot of that comes down to how are we effectively using resources? And I think that that's probably around where I understand ESG to be. So it is, we can think of it as where are we putting too much money, where are we putting not enough, and where are we not putting any at all? That gives us a tool to measure. The impact then is how do we know if we're actually, if we do put money into a certain area, are we going to actually help that population? So I think that you kind of need one to have the other, and the other feeds in kind of in this kind of virtuous loop. So just kind of summing up quickly, the intent for me for how we and when we invest in youth ideas is, are we doing so in a way that improves belonging, which is our guide for impact, and then as we manage it, do we know where the money's going, who it's going to, and why we did it in the first place? And I think all those things together kind of create a model for us to then understand both what we're doing and how to measure it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Grayson. Over to you, Samuel.
Thank you, Katie. Not much to add, just to describe the Mastercard Foundation Africa Growth Fund. It's led by MEDA. MEDA is the lead implementer and fund manager. And it's a fund of funds that is established specifically to support African-led investment vehicles. When we say investment vehicles, we're talking about risk capital vehicles, right? So anything other than your typical bank or microfinance institution that would take long-term investment exposures in companies. And these companies, we want them to be SMEs. Now, gender lens investing, Katie, you spoke about that. That's key to us. We believe that our catalytic nature is expressed in focusing on gender lens investing vehicles, those vehicles that have gender captured across different levels, from governance level to the kinds of companies they invest in, to the kinds of team members that they have. All of these count as very key issues to gender lens investing. Now, in terms of ESG, we are an impact investing catalytic vehicle. So our ultimate objective is to see companies grow with investment capital that eventually trickles down to them. But in that growth, what we want to see is jobs. And so we want to see decent and fulfilling jobs coming out of our work to ensure that this is having the percolative effect downwards on jobs on the continent. How do you get these jobs? Revenue for the companies that we work with has to grow. And so the capital approach is using finance and investment to be able to catalyze companies to grow. And when those companies grow, the ultimate effect is going to be a growth in jobs. That's in short, our theory of change. So how does ESG come in there? It's a very critical part of what we do, and we start with it from the inception of our engagement with investment vehicles. We want that to be a part of the way the businesses view their operations going forward. So we don't want ESG to become an add-on. It has to be specific to everything that they do. So in a typical business, you have the environmental aspects, you have the social aspects, and you have the governance aspects. A typical business will focus a bit on the environmental issues as a license to operate, but the social issues are around where you have jobs coming out of the operations of the company. And so we work with them to establish a framework from our due diligence phase, a framework that is going to help them capture this. It's going to help them capture it alongside the normal operations of the business, right? So not a different track, but something that is embedded in how they operate their businesses in the market. Gender diversity, equity, and inclusion. Again, another thing that we track at due diligence level to determine how aware are the companies of gender diversity tools and frameworks. What can we give them to support them to begin to implement those things in their businesses, and then based on that, grow with it into the future, hopefully with the capital that we provide to them to be able to make a difference. So I'll stop there. We can go into more detail into how we've used ESG to support our businesses into the future. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Samuel. So you're looking for areas related to environment, social governance as part of your due diligence, and then as part of the investment period, you're looking to create impact through those funds and those companies in terms of decent jobs and other areas.
Yes, we're very intentional about saying, look, this is part of the deal.
Yep.
Right. So we're bringing you capital. We also have, and I didn't say this in my intro, we have a consortium of partners that we work with. So we have a partner that is focused on business development services. And within business development services, of course, you have value creation, which is growing the businesses. You have ESG, which is basically helping them to make sure that they're compliant in that area. And what we do is we're saying, look, jobs is key. Jobs for youth and women is key for us. So let's see your business growing. And as you grow, have this in mind. Come to us for any other support that you need in terms of resources, other than capital, so that we can see the ESG impact leading to jobs for youth and women on the continent. So that's our approach, yeah. Okay. And I take what Executive Director Elizabeth said about businesses being part of the solution, right? And so we have to nurture those businesses with ESG in mind and making sure that that is leading to the impacts that we want to see in the environment, socially, and in governance.
Great. So that leads nicely into the next question in terms of, and keeping in mind that I think 2% of the global assets under management right now is dedicated to impact investment, so a small percentage. There is momentum, it is growing, but can we talk a little bit about, is it ever too early or too late to be integrating impact into businesses? So Grayson, let's start with you.
Yeah, I would say it's never too early. I think that you can think about it using a metaphor of planting a tree or planting an orchard. So if I wanted to go out and then plant 1,000 trees, that's really hard. And I think that when we approach things like measurement or we approach things like governance, we expect to be perfect right away. And I think that this is it's a flawed reasoning to approach things that way, because nobody does it well the first time. And kind of echoing what Samuel says, it really is a journey. I mean, you don't start measuring everything immediately. Yep. You start measuring what you can. And then the insights that you get from those then start to lead you to say, hey, maybe we could measure something else. Mm-hmm. Perhaps that by doing this, we can have increased impact. Perhaps we can actually be able to now save money that allows us to then put back into our business. And I think that this is really the approach that I would encourage most people to take, is start doing it immediately so you start to develop that muscle memory. Because if you wait several years, then ESG really is a secondary thought, like it is in many places around the world right now. And for something that's so important in order to understand what is actually happening on these major areas that impact all of us, at the end of the day, these decisions, what we measure, impact each and every one of us around the environment, how clean it is, around the sustainability of our activities, that's jobs for people, and around the governance, which leads up into reducing corruption, the ability to understand how resources are being spent. Yep. All of these things are critical to civilization at this moment in time. So there are tools, obviously, that allow you to, that people have been thinking about this way more than at least me, that have developed to make it easy so you can start measuring more earlier. But at the very least, to have that as an agenda item with leadership on a regular basis is incredibly important from the beginning.
And Grayson, can you share some examples of what you're seeing at the lab in terms of you're working with kids and youth? So what kind of businesses are they dreaming up of? What are their ideas?
So, you know, it's really rewarding to work with youth, and I know you probably hear a lot of people say that, but let me tell you why, just from a professional in the innovation field. Youth are incredible. They have the best ideas because they don't know what's impossible. And once you remove the artificial construct of what's possible, then all of a sudden you're able to solve all kinds of problems. So I'm going to answer this a little bit differently, but what we see at the lab is that change happens much faster than what we expect, because once youth get involved, there's an energy, there's a momentum that starts to move people forward. The ideas that they look at are, and for us, we're interested in investing in like social and community innovation, so small things that improve society. So we, as adults, may just accept something in the community. We don't think it's that big of a deal. Maybe it's a hassle. You know, I think potholes are a really good example. You know, we all drive, we bump over it, it's okay. Maybe, you know, something spills one day and then you really care about it. But other than that, you're okay with it. Whereas youth will see things and say, you know what, that wall needs a mural on it. Or we need to put a land acknowledgement when people arrive at the airport. Or we should be able to measure well water automatically because it's so expensive to have this done on a regular basis, and we can have technology and tools that can do it in real time to monitor it. So these are some of the ideas that youth can come up with that have come up in this community. But if you see what youth come up around the world, they will find the small things that have an exponential impact on quality of life for each and every one of us. And I think that that's the importance of investing, and with the Waterloo Regional Community Foundation, this idea of social infrastructure, youth are the first and the front line to be able to tell us this is what we need, because where in some places around the world they may be half of the population, or here they're about 30%, they are 100% of the future, and not taking into account, not understanding what they want to see for the future is, at this point in time, it's criminal. So we have to do better.
Amazing,
Hope that helps.
amazing, thank you. Magali, what are your thoughts on, is it ever too early or too late to integrate impact?
Definitely, it's never too early. I completely agree with Grayson. And building on that, I think it is a journey. It is a process. It can really feel daunting at the beginning to try to get it all right, but you can start step by step, right? And I think a good example for us is what we do with our Gender Lens Investing Fund. We don't necessarily just invest in women-led companies or companies that are doing everything right from the start. We want to invest in companies that show a real commitment to improve, to change the gender business practices that they have. So we do an assessment while we're doing due diligence in a company. We identify the gaps and the opportunities that they have. We look for objectives that align with their strategies, because that way we see that they will be more motivated to change and to work on that. So as part of the contract of the investment, we set up goals for them, and with the support of technical assistance, we work with them in order to get to achieving those objectives. And we start actually, in terms of gender, we start with training, with capacity building of the company's teams. We start with unconscious gender bias training, which I think is one of the most important barriers to gender equality. And then we really come up with recommendations for initiatives for changing policies, for different practices within the company or with regards to their clients. It can be something like build a new product to serve the needs of women clients, or develop a new, more gender-responsive marketing or communication strategy, or improving workplace equity policies. But then what we really see is that as they get into it and they reach that specific goal, they see the results, they see the impact with their clients, with their workforce, and they're more motivated to continue to do more. So that becomes really a virtuous cycle of improvements, and that becomes a journey, right? You don't get it all right at the beginning, but you work on it and you continue to improve.
Yeah.
So it's not just about investing in companies that are already creating impact, but it's about assessing the companies and seeing signs that they're willing to embrace impact. And I know just from my experience, and I'm sure most of you would agree, is that looking at the leaders and getting those signals from the leaders that they're really open to pushing for that impact is really, really critical, because unless it's coming from the top level, then it's likely not going to succeed. Samuel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think those are really great points. I just want to demystify establishing it from the beginning a bit. So in one of our funds that we've invested in, it's an early stage fund, it's woman-led, and small, and trying to cope with what they have. They don't have a big team, they don't have a fancy governance, but they do have a board, right? They do have what you call a senior investment team. And so how do you embed ESG and GDEI in there? You don't ask them to hire a separate person, but you empower them to say, look, designate one or two of your people to take the hat on championing ESG, championing GDI in the companies that you're going to invest in. So that helps and you give them the framework, to give them the tools, and you say, look, for these particular companies that you're with, you may be able to find an opportunity from day one to establish ESG frameworks or ESG targets. But if you can't, start with the lowest hanging fruit, begin to talk about it. I think the social is one of the ones that people engage with more readily, because most companies will hire people. Once you hire people, you get engrossed and engaged in what their daily issues are. How do they come to work in the morning? How do you deal with their safety and care in the office, in the business? And most of these businesses are consumer businesses or producing businesses. And so how do you work with that? So those are the kinds of things that we do from day one. We may go into pros and cons, but there are pros and cons in starting too early and also starting late. But I guess when we get to that,
please share.
we can talk about it.
Yep.
I think when the business is not yet fully, should I say, established or not at cruising level, it can become very difficult for them to stomach what they are seeing as additional things. And so that's where you need a skill of saying, look, how do you negotiate this? How do you negotiate the framework under which we're going to begin to look at the social effects of the business? Because for us as an investor, it is critical. We're not your typical investment firm looking for money returns and money multiples. We are looking for that, but we also think that it should not be divorced from impact. We're of the school of thought that a thriving school, for example, is a great way to have impact. And it will make money, and it will educate children, right? The more children that it educates, the more its teachers are going to be rewarded, the more its workers are going to be rewarded, and the more social benefits that you get. So we try to bring those things to the view of the firms that we work with. We have another example with a fintech company. And who would have thought that a fintech company was so impactful? We have found they have hundreds of thousands, well, just a bit over 100,000, of value chain jobs that are being created because of the services that they provide. And in our economies in Africa, banking is much more difficult than it is. Access to banking is much more difficult. So what they've done is they provided what we call POSs using cellular technology and so on. Anybody and everybody can borrow money piecemeal for their daily transactions. So a mom and pop store in a corner, a woman-led kiosk in a corner, can borrow just what she needs to be able to buy the goods and services that she can sell in a day. So you're breaking bulk, you're being able to sell that, put the money right back on the POS, and be able to borrow again the following day. You're reducing interest costs, but you're enabling them to be able to make a lot of difference. Transport providers, right? They're all linked into the system and creating an ecosystem of social effects in terms of jobs, decent livelihoods for these people, which we had not thought about at all. We thought all our impacts, social impacts, were going to come from large agribusinesses, but here's a fintech that's making a huge difference, and it's because we've said, look at these issues, let's talk about them, let's see. And when you discuss with them is when they see that, hey, we are actually making an impact without having to change our business model. Our business model is actually making impact for people and their livelihoods.
Interesting.
Yep.
Thank you, Samuel. Tim, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Well, you won't be surprised that I have the same view that it's never too early. And I think it's just stage adjusted is the appropriate measurement. I spent 10 years as a venture capitalist investing in early stage technology companies in and around this region. And what I learned from that is that if you start cultural stuff when there's 3 or 4 people as founders, then when that company is 200 or 300 people, that's just embedded in the culture. And so I think this is no different. And that sense of impact should grow with the company. And so it shouldn't be necessarily onerous, I think, similar to what you're saying, Samuel, at the beginning, but there has to be that cultural sense. And then as it grows, it just becomes part of the culture. I also think you can look at what people can do with where they are. And so I'll give you an example from the Waterloo Community Foundation. We decided to make an investment in a venture fund called Stand Up Ventures, run by Michelle McBain. It is a fund that invests in women-led entrepreneur or women-led ventures. But that appealed to us, obviously. But the second thing that appealed to us was when I was a venture capitalist, my partner Jackie was one of only 2 women that were partners in VC firms in Canada, and it has been a challenge for the sector. Well, Michelle, in her firm Stand Up, is not exclusively, but is predominantly hiring women into the firm who are then becoming experts in venture capital. So she is building capacity in that sector. And so when we looked at it from the Community Foundation and said, we wanted to make an investment through a gender lens, this hit 2 things for us. So I use that as an example of where a small firm, Michelle's fund, Stand Up, is a relatively small venture fund, but she's thinking about what can she do within the context of where she sits within an ecosystem. And so that's the stuff we're looking for, are people who are thinking about how can they take deliberate action. And I think you can do that early on. And my hope is that Michelle will, 10 years from now, be running $1 billion, and there'll be people that have worked with Michelle running venture funds all throughout the country and the world. So.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So building on that, what would you do if you came across a company that has products that are trying to address a climate solution? So they sell solar panels, let's say, but has very poor governance structures and does not treat their employees well. How would you handle that? What's your take? Would you invest?
So I think the short answer is I don't think we would invest, because we would take the position that the outcome doesn't justify how you got there. But I think what it would do for us is start a conversation, and start a conversation with we've engaged an outsourced chief investment officer who's helping with this stuff. And that would be, and I think we would want that firm to know why we haven't invested, or at least to start a conversation to say, on the face of it, you look like you'd be a good investment for us, but there are these challenges. Can we develop a plan? And obviously, it depends on the size of, how big we are relative to the firm, whether we can have an impact. But I think I would like to hope that we wouldn't just walk away and say no. It would be no because, or yes, but you have to do this, so that we are actually causing change to happen.
Awesome. Magali, how about you? Can you share an example of a time when Deetken has come across this kind of tension between, impact on some parts of the business, but not so great work in other parts of the business, and how you've handled that?
I don't recall a case specifically, but what I was thinking while Tim was answering the question was, I was looking at this report by Bain Company and EcoVadis, and they're a sustainability rating provider. And they looked at 100,000 companies with diverse ESG ratings. And what they were looking for is a correlation between the ESG practices and policies that a company has with the company results, with the bottom line, basically. And in that case, I mean, a company that has poor workforce policies is going to have low productivity. Yep. It's going to have high rotation, no ability to attract talent. In the end, it's going to have, less revenue, lower productivity. So that business is not going to do well, right? So I wouldn't invest in it, right? So I think it's important for us to see how much impact that ESG lens or ESG way of doing business affects the way that the business is going to do in the long run.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Grayson, do you have thoughts?
Well, we can see what we do as investments, but I would say that they're more, we probably wouldn't call it that exactly using those words. So I don't know if this totally applies to the work that I'm doing, but I would say that just in general, to echo what Magali said, 100%, it's kind of a red flag if you have an organization that's not doing these things and then they're claiming to do something else. I mean, it's just, we should reflect what we say we do in our work in such a way that it's internally and externally correlated, or at least that's the wrong word. Aligned, yes.
Yeah, makes sense. Samuel, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this, and as you're sharing, how you would handle this potential tension, and if you come across a company like that, can you also say what you would do if you would decide to pursue that investment, how you would support them? What approaches would you use?
Sure. Thanks, Katie. Yes, we find this all the time. No, not all the time, but quite often. One of the key areas we find with SMEs is governance, right? It's a family-owned business. They have different relatives in different positions. Some of them are well-suited, some of them are not. Some of them are culturally unable to have brainstorming sessions, let's call it that, right? And so we begin to help them to understand governance and why it's important. And governance is not only about boards and stuff like that, but trickling down through all the company, how are decisions made about purchases, how are decisions made about payments, and all of those things. So we begin to give them resources to support. As I said, we do have quite an arsenal, different from a typical investment vehicle, because we have an envelope that supports business development services. So that's where the solutions come from. You have a separate team that can work with the company to say, look, we can help you. We can do an assessment of the situation, put it to you. At the end of the day, it's your decision whether this is something you want to do and how that's going to help the business. And sometimes it takes time. It takes time for them to begin to realize how helpful a change in their ESG, let's call it procedures and policies, can help them improve. So we do that quite a bit of the time. But the other thing I also want to mention is, Magali, you're talking about workforce. These days, the workforce is very different than it used to be. You don't have an army of people who are not connected, cannot speak with each other. So if your employment policies or your job policies are bad, young people will compare, they will talk, they will go on Facebook, they will chit-chat with each other, they will find out what's happening in another company and move on. So there's much more risk of losing good stuff if you continue to use archaic and old policies to run the businesses. And that's key to any business surviving. So we continue to support them with that. So the frameworks coming from our partners who are focused on BDS, gender, communications, even results measurement, help us to be able to make a difference. And in line with that, I must speak about the work we're doing with ESG Tree. We've just started a project with them on one of our funds where we're looking to use their platform to begin to formalize kind of ESG results, right? Even doing benchmarking across different companies, benchmarking across Africa, benchmarking across different industries to see how we can use that to prop up ESG within the companies that we work with. Yeah, so lots
Great.
of
Thanks,
lots of
Damien.
exciting things happening. Yeah.
So you're talking about incentives to be more impactful, but also the risk of not being impactful, because more and more companies are starting to realize the opportunities of creating impact, the business opportunities, and the risks of the competition taking advantage and them losing out.
Yep.
Okay.
Real risk. Yep.
Magali, can you share a little bit about the type of support technical assistance that Deetken Impact offers to its investees and how it really helps them to accelerate their impact?
For sure, and I think it's what Samuel is referring as business development services. I think as impact investors, we're really positioned to support the businesses where we invest, so we provide more than capital. When we raised our funds, we raised capital from private investors, family offices, foundations, individuals, but also from developmental financial institutions, from multilaterals. And we really, it's important for us to raise funding for technical assistance, because that way we can also provide support. An example, and building on how do we support companies into this journey, I think it's important what Samuel was saying, is to really analyze where you're at, where are the benchmarks, where you want to get to, what you need to work on, and then build capacity internally, right? Because it's important to be able to measure and make changes as we go. One example that I want to share is from the renewable energy sector. We invested in a company that develops solar projects, and we helped them put together a social and environmental management system. That is something that is key for any company that works in the renewable energy industry, and it encompasses all social and environmental risks and opportunities as well. In this sector, most of the times companies engage with the community where the projects are located. But in many cases, it's not in an intentional or holistic way, right? So with this company, we talked about them, and they came up with this idea of doing an apiary, so a beekeeping project within the solar project. And I don't know if you knew, but I didn't know this, but the bees are naturally attracted to the solar panels. So it kind of, it's interesting how they come together. But what they decided to do this in a forested area next to the solar project, and do this project to support women in the community, to take care of the bees and then sell the product and have an additional source of income for these women in the community. So with our support, we engaged a consultant who has experience developing these projects. This is in the Dominican Republic. And they put together a really good project, financially sustainable. And we supported with funding too for the pilot project phase. And so they're on their way to do this in that project. And what's really good is that they're going to be building on it. So as they build other projects, they see this way of supporting the community in a really interesting and an intentional way.
Oh, interesting. I did not know that about bees being attracted to solar panels. Tim, in your experience working both in venture capital and private equity, have you seen differences in terms of what kind of support business owners need in order to really accelerate their impact?
Yeah, so I don't profess to have a ton of experience in the sense that I have a ton of experience in the impact investing world, the business world, a little bit different. I come from this community in terms of the tech sector, and I think you had Kevin on earlier. It's been a bit of a struggle, I think, to be blunt, with a lot of my peers in the technology sector to say, I'm just focused on my business, and I'm doing whatever I need to do to get involved. So I think our opening speaker today, who talked about there are resources for business leaders. I think Kevin Tour, who was just on the last panel, led some stuff around tech for good. And this sense we were trying locally to get technology leaders to understand the implications and ramifications of the work they were doing. And I would say my peers that when I was coming up through the tech sector would say, I'll deal with that afterwards. I'm going to to be somewhat crass, I'm going to make all my money, and then I'm going to do my good. And so we did things locally, like in the Accelerator Center, bringing not-for-profits embedded in with the early stage technology businesses. So they were co-located, co-mingling, and building their entities together. So you had someone building a nonprofit alongside people who were building for-profit entities. And I think that sharing of, you're dealing with the same issues I'm dealing with, whether you're building a not-for-profit or a for-profit entity. I will say, I don't think it had some massive transformational shift. But I just think we need to keep pounding away at it. And there's a group in this community that continues to do that. But I'm far from an expert on it, Katie, but I think it's communities, groups like Communitech, groups like the Accelerator Center, Velocity, need to make sure the early stage companies understand the implications of what they're doing, and again, it comes back to that culture. I can get on a whole soapbox around how this community has transformed itself. If I use Waterloo as an example, automotive parts, textiles, manufacturing, people used to be at jobs for 20, 30 years. They're in the tech sector, they're at jobs for 2 or 3 years. They don't see their boss involved with the United Way or the Community Foundation and the like, which they saw when they were in a career where they were in the plant, for example, for 20 years. If you come out as a 19-year-old, you graduate, your boss is 21, and the founder of the company is 25, there's not always a sense of, I need to be involved in community, because they haven't seen those examples. So I think it's a combination of community needs to play a role in terms of particularly communities like ours that's going through a transition of economy. So it's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but I think it's both ways. But I do think groups like Communitech, community foundations and the like, who are working with particularly early stage entrepreneurs, that's probably one of the best resources that I've seen work.
Not wishy-washy.
Okay.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much. No, honestly, because just building on that point around collaboration and these hubs like Communitech, where there's all these little businesses that are rubbing shoulders with each other, I think there's so much opportunity for sharing there. Even just in my own work, I recently brought together different banks in the Caribbean who are, 2 of which have very strong gender integration into their operations and lending to women, and one of which is just sort of starting on their gender journey, and getting those banks together in the same room, talking to each other about these are the strategies we use to attract more women borrowers, or this is how we analyze the needs of women entrepreneurs. It was transformational, honestly, for these banks to learn from each other. So I think there's so much opportunity there. Thank you. So I think we're almost at time. I think the last question or comment from the 4 of you is just in 30 seconds to a minute, what do you want to see in 5 years in this space?
I'll jump in just because I want to piggyback on that insightful comment that you made. So the idea, around having community or institutions that start to kind of build capacity, and so you see this type of involvement, so it's this pro-social behavior. And when you have, to your example, a young company or, where you're moving around, you don't really get, for lack of a better term, indoctrinated. You're not kind of, radiated with this type of pro-social behavior. And I think that becomes an externality that organizations like Communitech, or even the community have, which is, think of it as kind of moving from the dad voice to the grandmother voice, where the dad voice is always saying, turn off those lights, and making sure that everyone goes back and turns off the lights. That's just building the awareness. And that's absolutely needed, and that's needed for every company. The next one kind of maybe is the mom voice who's tired of listening to the dad, who says, let's put on some sensors in the room so the lights just automatically turn off when people leave. All of a sudden, you're kind of starting to improve, and now you've evolved to the point where you have a data point and a tool that now allows you to do more things. And that kind of evolves into kind of this grandfather voice, which then says, well, what are the wise practices? And if we've done it once, we should have been doing it again and again, and that becomes a standard amongst the community. And then we get to the grandmother voice, which is, why are we even doing this? Tell us more about this. What can we do now that we've saved all this time, all this ability, and now we can ask better questions and use better resources? And that's really, I think, what the ultimate impact of ESG is, of the ability to measure, of any type of software that does that, is the ability to ask better questions and make wise choices so that we can do more with the resources that we have.
Amazing. Thanks, Grayson. Over to you, Samuel.
So I'll add a little bit. And I'm going to use my targets, right? So my targets are to reach 200 companies, through 20 investment vehicles, right? Now, if all of these companies, or majority of these companies, right, are able to have the kinds of effects that we want to have on gender equality, the kinds of effects we want to have on dignified and fulfilling jobs, I'll be a very happy person. And I think the whole of the fund consortium will be very happy. Our funders, the Mastercard Foundation, MEDA, and then, of course, the beneficiaries, right? So if 200 companies, are able to have, how many jobs, right? Hundreds of thousands of jobs. If those companies are sustainable because we put in not only capital, but BDS resources, value creation resources, we've established the frameworks for gender, diversity, equity, and inclusion. If we've been able to progress on ESG, then we're beginning to see a tidal change in impact investing across the continent. And that's what we're looking to see in the future. And so let's watch this space. In 2 to 3 years, I'll come banging on the doors and say, I want to speak about where we are, and hopefully we'll have made a difference on that and continue. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Samuel. Over to you, Magali.
I totally agree. I think we need to continue to measure. We need to continue to build the evidence, the business case, because that's how we are gonna, learn and understand that it's not just the right thing to do. Yeah. It is good for business, right? And I really want to invite everyone here, if you're in your role as an employee, as a manager, as a board member, as a student or a professor, push for this, commit to this, right? Because I think we all have a role to play to really make a more sustainable and equitable world for ourselves.
Thanks.
5 years from now, I hope that sitting on this stage are the chief investment officers for the largest pension funds in Canada and the world. Money moves things, and several of us are involved with with foundations. I think foundations lead the movement on a lot of this stuff because at our core is doing good, but the big money is with the pension funds. And so the hope, I think, with those of us that are involved in some of this work in the foundation world is saying, if we show that you can actually generate a financial return while also doing good, then pension funds may follow. And that would be my hope, that because that will move a corporate, or will make corporate change happen. So that would be my hope. Is you've got 4 big pension fund CIOs up here saying, here's what we did and here's how the impact it's had.
Gender diverse leaders of pension funds.
Oh yes,
yes,
absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you all. So our 4 amazing panelists have given us lots to think about. We want to open up to audience questions.
Hello. We have several questions from the Slido, so I'm going to read a couple of them. So the first one is, does an impact investment opportunity float to the top of your priority list if it is addressing multiple impact areas?
Is that question directed to anyone or just free?
To all.
Free
to all of the
okay.
panelists.
How about Magali?
Well, certainly. I mean, when we get companies to us, we take a thorough look on the business, the business potential, the financials, and the impact. If it's addressing different impact areas, we really have to see how sustainable that is, right? And how robust the methodology that they're following is. But certainly we look at their capacity to continue to grow in that, to measure, to report, right? I don't know, what would you say, Samuel?
So I think focus is important, right? And the ability to deliver on what you have in your investment thesis, which includes what you're going to do financially, but also what you're going to do in terms of impact. So it's important to choose those impacts that are, really adjacent to the business that you do, right? And it's not distracting you from what you want to do. So I was on a panel the other day and we were speaking about training teachers versus education, right? Are you looking to have students graduate, or are you looking to train teachers? They're 2 different things. And combining them, at some point they intersect, but but combining them as your two major objectives may distort your ability to do each of them as best as you can. So I think the key thing is if you have those impact objectives, which ones are you prioritizing? Which one is really adjacent to your business and will be additional to your business, is what I'll add to that, yeah.
We have just 5 minutes, so maybe just we'll move on to the next question.
Okay, so this one says, how do you detect or deal with greenwashing?
Who wants to take that?
I'll take that.
Please.
Greenwashing is fraud. I mean, it's the same way that you would deal with accounting fraud. You have to investigate and see what it is. And any type of, ESG washing or, I guess virtue signaling, but you're doing something wrong in the back end, it's wrong. It's not that complicated. We should be very clear about this. And we handle it the exact same way.
Can I just jump in?
Of course.
I'm looking at Alva, who is from the Community Foundation, and we did a whole process to evaluate people that would help us on this journey. And I found it fascinating that there were firms that came to us to pitch us on engaging them, who said, we are experts that can help you transition from a traditional portfolio to a 100% mission-aligned portfolio. And they would show up in a meeting, and they would be your typical 4 males that look like me, and there'd be 2 people who were their impact experts, and when you unpacked it, they had met 3 minutes before joining the meeting. They'd never met these people in their firm before, and I would argue that's just as bad. Yep. So it's not just even the companies that are doing greenwashing, it's advisors or people who are holding themselves out as advisors are just as bad. And so obviously we didn't engage any of those firms.
It's a great example. Yep. All right, next question. Let's get through these. There's one up here. Oh.
What would you say that companies can use to provide more transparency to showcase the S and the G? Because I find there are transparency mechanisms you can use for addressing the E, but what about S and G?
Interesting. Who would like to take that?
Magali? I'm volunteering here.
Well, look at you. It's your world.
I think the social, there's many ways that you can do that. Like social refers to your relationship to your different stakeholders, right? So it starts with your team, your workforce. There are many ways that you can analyze the policies and practices that are in place. I mean, sexual harassment is one, for instance, that it's been kind of in the forefront of many discussions, right? It is necessary that every company has one, right? So I think it's, in terms of the social, with the team, it's very easy to see what policies they have, whether they actually implement them or not, what kind of mechanisms they have internally to report situations, how do they deal with situations, right? But the same with regards to their clients, with regards to the community where they are operating, there are mechanisms to see how a company is behaving in that way. And in terms of governance, I think it starts with, I think Samuel alluded to that before, what kind of structure the company has. Do they have a board of directors? Is it a diverse and inclusive board? Do they have independent members? Right? How does that trickle to the management team? What kind of relationship there is? What about ethics? What about, we're talking about money laundering policies and things like that, right? So I think once you start looking at a business, from our perspective as investors, we do a thorough due diligence, right? There's ways to look at those things very, very closely.
Okay, thanks, Magali. I know there's a few more questions, but unfortunately we're at time. So thank you, Tim, Magali, Grayson, and Samuel so much for your perspectives. I know we're just scratching the surface here, but I think hopefully we've given everyone lots to think about. So really appreciate your insights.
Thanks,
you.
Katie.
Thank you again to all our speakers and also to our moderator, Katie, for a fantastic discussion. And as Katie said, we know there's a lot more questions. As we are commencing to our first short break, we encourage that we continue these conversations for our in-person audience to ask questions. And it's great to hear that there is a general agreement that it's never too early to start integrating ESG. And as I said, we are now moving into our first 15-minute break. And for our in-person audience, please enjoy some free refreshments in the foyer right outside the auditorium, and please be back by 11 a.m. for our keynote speaker, AJ Agrawal. And for our online audience, feel free to step away from your desk to stretch and see you back here at 11 a.m. Thank you.